Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm really happy that you're interested in this topic today. We've seen a lot of good information thus far at our customer conference, but we'd like to take a little time to talk about something that's less data-driven and more cognitive. And that's why people hate to track their time and what you can do about it. Because the fact is, time tracking, who knew, is not the most popular thing to do. And when people hate to fill out timesheets, it negatively impacts your organization. You don't have the data you need to drive performance. It's late. It's sometimes incorrect. So getting people to better accept the need for time tracking, turns out, is pretty important. Companies, of course, like to have a time tracking system in place. It's the people, the individual employees who are asked to track time that don't like it very much, and some really, really don't like it. But the fact of the matter is, your company needs the information because the timesheet information is incredibly valuable to help improve corporate performance, project performance, team performance, and as we'll talk about, even the performance of individuals. So the company needs it. People really hesitate or resist doing it. What to do? Pardon me. It pays to step back a moment and remember why companies want to track time in the first place. It's really to do very reasonable things. The most reasonable of which, I think your employees would agree, is to pay your employees. And companies want to do other things with that time data. If you saw the SimStar presentation, you saw a very powerful example of what timesheet data can bring to a company and how it can empower them to retain employees. If you didn't see that, I urge you to look at the recording. And companies want to do things like get paid by their customers for the work their employees do for those customers. Maybe they want to track progress on projects. That might be tracking labor costs against a project budget, or it might be tracking hours worked against a project schedule. And all of these important things also help a company understand its profitability, not only at the corporate level, but at the project level, the team level. In short, the timesheet data is something that companies want to have because it's absolutely necessary for the company to deliver business results. And yet, employees still resist time tracking. Now, what we've learned from our customers and in fact from tracking our own time over the years is that there are the reasons employees will give you about why they're willing to why they're not willing to fill out their timesheets. And the reasons they are willing to say usually fall into a group of categories, such as I'm too busy to fill out my timesheet. Some take it a little further and declare that filling out a timesheet is a waste of my time. And some truly believe that filling out a timesheet doesn't add value. And from that individual's perspective, they may all seem to be very true. However, there's what employees will tell you about their objections to filling out timesheets when asked, but it's important today that we talk about what they're probably also thinking. Because what they're thinking, the things that drive real resistance to the time tracking requirement, that's what you need to deal with to increase compliance with timesheet submittals. And what employees think, it turns out, but might not admit out loud, is a fear that the information that they're providing the company in their timesheet might be used in unfair ways. And this is just a human tendency. All of us, employees, managers, team members, all of us have certain cognitive biases that affect everything in our lives. But it's interesting to discover how they particularly affect time tracking, how we feel about it, and why some people are very resistant to doing it. Understanding these biases and how they come into play is critical because you need to get buy-in in order to improve timesheet compliance. Generally speaking, employees fear that biased judgment might be applied to the information they submit in a timesheet, and that fear makes a blank timesheet a very intimidating thing to face. One of the biases that they may worry about is minimization of their work. Again, an all too human tendency. Other people's work seems easier to us than our own work. My teammates, sometimes I wonder why they don't just straighten up and understand how simple their job is. My job, on the other hand, pretty difficult, pretty complicated. And it's a human tendency. Because it's human and that tendency is familiar to us, at a blank timesheet, we can often stop and worry. When I really fill out how much time it took to do this project, this activity, how is that going to be judged? So the fear of how things will be judged plays a really important role. And sometimes people don't even understand that they bring these fears to the table. Another one is judgment of estimates. The fact is, when you're entering the actual hours you have worked against an activity, a customer job, or a project, you may have given an estimate earlier about what it would take you to accomplish that. And estimation is hard. That means all too often, when we enter the actuals against that estimate, we were probably wrong. We went over, we went under. Well, the most powerful use of timesheet data, among the many powerful uses, is to help companies improve their estimation capability. But that means you have to judge your estimates. No one likes to be judged, and we all know estimation is hard. So facing the blank timesheet, employees may wonder, is the information I'm providing going to be used to help me improve my estimations? Or am I going to be punished for my failures when I give wrong estimates? Makes it pretty intimidating. Another category of bias that employees might fear, and maybe they know they do, or maybe they don't even realize they fear it, is that time is productivity myth that I think we've all heard about, but it pays to just remind ourselves how it might come into play when people are resisting the need to fill out a timesheet. It's all too easy to believe that people who just log more hours are more productive than people who log fewer working hours. But time is only one input to any productivity calculation. So time spent alone, in and of itself, really isn't a good proxy for productivity. And yet, because we're prone to use time as a proxy for productivity, it becomes very intimidating when you're sitting in front of the blank timesheet. You're worried about how the number of hours you spend or don't spend might be perceived by someone who's getting the data. Related to that is the constancy of productivity myth. By that we mean, if it took 5 hours last week for me to do some sort of activity, but it took longer this week, how is that going to be judged? Last week was a different context than this week, and human beings are not consistently productive over time. Productivity ebbs and flows. And yet, we're not sure how that's going to be judged by the people who see our time records. So it makes us hesitate. And lastly, the 8-hour-a-day myth. In front of a blank timesheet, we need to account for most companies, an 8-hour day. And yet, most people do take breaks, they do socialize. In fact, we know that teams that have no socialization seldom cohere, seldom work together well. So this is something that most companies understand and even encourage. And yet, in front of that blank timesheet, you really are worried how you're reporting that 8-hour day and how it will be perceived if someone ran across you twice in the break room having a social conversation. So people do actually fear how the information they're providing in that timesheet is going to be judged by the consumers of that information. But it's not only how others might judge our timesheet information. We ourselves sometimes have trouble handling the truth of where our time actually goes during the day. Now, there are certainly some special cases that make it difficult for people. In some companies, groups of employees who have just been given a time tracking obligation, who haven't had one before, say they're salaried workers who have not had to track time in the past, but now the company wants to do project accounting or other time worked analyses. A new time tracking requirement can make some individuals feel that they've suffered a loss of status. That can make them resistant to the time tracking requirement. But even groups of employees who are accustomed to tracking their time can judge themselves in biased ways as well. Not only do we worry that others might minimize our work, we ourselves can do it. Certainly, when we give estimates, remember that estimation is difficult. We tend to minimize what it will take us to do a job. When you face that blank timesheet and you realize that your estimates have been wrong, it's an uncomfortable feeling. We too might be worried about the time we spend socializing and how to represent that in our timesheets. And if we've had a bad week, you had a cold, you're socializing a little more than usual, it can happen, and now it's time to fill out your timesheet. Well, if I feel bad about that, I'm likely to just avoid filling out the timesheet altogether, or maybe I'm afraid that I am less efficient than my coworkers. All of these are really emotional fears that, while they seem perhaps too squishy for those of us who are accustomed to dealing with data and facts in our job, they really exist and they really drive resistance to the time tracking requirement. So it's clear that there are discomforts that employees will talk about and some that they probably won't. And these discomforts need to be overcome in order to increase timesheet compliance in your organization, because people who are comfortable tracking their time will do it more reliably. They're far more likely to turn their timesheets on time, and they're far more likely to be accurate and honest about how they spent their time. So you need comfort so you can get buy-in from your end users, and we found that there are 3 principles that will help you achieve that buy-in and help overcome this discomfort. One is design a good time collection process, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Another is to educate the people who fill out a timesheet on the benefits of gathering that time data for everyone, the benefits to the organization, the benefits to teams, and the benefits to individuals. And of course, because there are these fears, you need to demonstrate in transparent ways that your company is trustworthy with the data that you're gathering. A good time collection system makes time easy to track. It's not easy to track unless employees can enter time only once in the same system, one system of record for hours worked. Because it's just a fact that if employees are required to enter the same time in multiple systems, it will lower participation, and data science shows us that multiple entries in multiple systems will increase error. And companies need the timesheet data quickly and they need it accurately. So it's important that employees enter time once and only once. Now, having a single system of time entry and a single system of record doesn't mean that your company doesn't need the time data to show up in different places or different systems. So have your timesheet system automatically share that data with key business systems. System integration is something we help customers with all the time. And if your company has a key system that isn't yet pulling data from Journyx timesheet and you think that would be valuable, give us a call. We'd love to help. We help companies with this all the time, because making people enter time in 2 different systems just doesn't work very well. You may also need the timesheet information reported to various stakeholders at various times. Again, it doesn't make sense to send employees to a different system. Have the timesheet system handle the data reporting. A Journyx timesheet comes with some reports out of the box, so to speak, even though there's no box anymore. You can also build reports using the report builder in the product. And if that is not good enough, and some companies really do have complex reporting requirements, we can help you get those met. And we can help you do all of these things so that people can enter time once and only once in a single system. Absolutely important to making time easy to track. But the timesheet also has to be ready when you are ready to fill it out. This does mean you need to make time entry available anywhere and any when. Now more than ever, work just doesn't always happen in the office. We all know that. So it really doesn't make sense to tie a timesheet to the need to be in a single location or to use a particular kind of device. And remember, if possible, let people enter time offline when necessary. Now, to do those things, it means that you'll need to ensure the timesheet system provides options to enter time via multiple devices like laptops or tablets, and with or without a network connection. The phone is a particularly important option. If your company hasn't yet started to use the Journyx mobile app, we encourage you to do so. So many people are working from their phone these days. And when they're ready to fill out their timesheet, they're likely to want to be able to do so via their phone. Making the timesheet ready when they are is critical to achieving better compliance with timesheet submittals. Also, the system should be able to log time for any type of work that your employees are doing. By that, we mean grouping all the different time reporting activities you can imagine together in that single timesheet system of record. So users need to be able to log time against projects, for example, but make sure they can also see and update their project assignments as well. And people don't just work on project or job work. They also do administrative or overhead work. Make sure they can log time against that in the same timesheet system. It also needs to manage overtime work. But what about time that isn't work? The timesheet system should also allow people to request time off, calculate leave time balances, and help the employees see what their balances are. Again, the same system handling all the different types of time reporting and requesting that a user might need to deal with when they're understanding what they're reporting to you about what they do all day. Some other things to consider: submission of reimbursable expenses, and related to work, even though these are not directly hours worked, are unit completion or equipment usage tracking, closely related to the work people will report to you in their timesheet system, but something that they can also account for in that single system for time reporting. So ensure that your timesheet is configured to log any type of work. A good time collection process should also make it easy to get it right. You want the timesheet system itself to minimize corrections by doing the work right there in the timesheet to verify and manage the accuracy of the data being entered before the timesheet is submitted for approval. A good way to do that is to make sure the timesheets are configured to filter project and other work selections, allowing users to only see what they're actually permitted to log time against. And you want to make sure that only valid options are displayed for each work type. If there's a project in my timesheet that I'm not supposed to be working on anymore, but it still shows up in a drop-down list, it means that I can inadvertently select that. That means my timesheet will be wrong, and we'll go through time-consuming and expensive correction process. The company doesn't get data as quickly as it should. Everybody suffers. So use the features of the timesheet configuration to help users get it right easily and quickly. All of this together helps ensure that you're not letting the timesheet become its own job. The most powerful thing you can do is automate time entries where it makes sense to do so. Overtime, for example, can be determined automatically based on rules that you set up in the system. Now that means your employees don't have to think about those calculations. In fact, not just overtime, but any data that can be derived automatically based on some type of rule, well, that's data that users don't have to deal with manually. Again, it helps save them time, effort, thought. It encourages prompt submittal of timesheets. But the most powerful thing you can do to avoid having the timesheet become its own job, and this, forgive me if I gush a little, this is absolutely my favorite feature. I myself really dislike filling out a timesheet. I work for a timesheet company, go figure, and I hate it. But I use the Journyx timesheet feature called the suggestion engine. And at the end of the week, using that feature, it will suggest logical entries. Actually, it will automatically fill out my timesheet for me at the end of the week. Now, in my case, I have it look at my calendar, which is the relevant tool for me. You look at my calendar and pull data in and fill out my timesheet. Now, I don't have to stick with that. If I was in traffic and I missed a meeting, I can make a correction to my timesheet. But how awesome is that? My timesheet fills itself out. I don't have extra busy work. And this was really powerful for me. I can't say enough good things about it. But anything you can do to automate where it makes sense, to keep the timesheet easy to use for the user, that will reduce that resistance and get people submitting timesheets on time. It's not enough to have a good data collection process for timesheets. Even the best time collection process will meet with resistance if your employees don't know that you'll use the data appropriately. And of course, we've touched on that briefly already. People do have, it's all too human, to have certain fears about how the actual facts of what we do all day will be perceived. We think a best practice here is to let users know that their timesheets are not used for performance evaluation at the individual level. Now, granted, we understand that hours worked is an important fact that managers use to evaluate employees overall, but a timesheet system alone would seldom be used to do so. It's for obvious reasons. The hours worked that I tell you about in my timesheet says nothing about the quality of work I do. It certainly can't calculate my efficiency because, as we said, it's a calculation. It's really kind of a ratio. Time is only one factor, and skill has an impact. And even when companies have some kind of a skill setting in their timesheet, even within the same skill bracket, there may be more experienced employees than others. So timesheet data alone might be part of an evaluation picture, but it's not the system that companies would use to evaluate employees. But all too often, employees may fear that it plays an oversized role in evaluating their performance as an individual. So a good practice is to put them at ease about that and to let them know that the timesheet data you're asking them to provide are best used and will be used to evaluate the organization's performance against its goals. Unfortunately, the discomfort with timesheets is also being driven by a new trend in this space, which is employee surveillance and employee monitoring. And there are some tools out there that link time tracking into the overall employee monitoring and surveillance activities. And while there may be some companies that have a legitimate need to surveil their employees, it may be that companies who don't really need to do monitoring at the level of surveillance may nonetheless be sold on the benefits of doing so. And this trend is, as you might imagine, disturbing to employees. And because it's sometimes bundled with a time tracking system in the market out there, we're seeing that our customers are telling us that there's more and more resistance to time tracking in general when employees fear that might be in play. And we are living more and more in a surveillance economy. So we would encourage companies who are considering time tracking solutions and looking at those that might be tied to something that's more akin to employee surveillance to ask themselves, what problem are we really trying to solve here? Is bad management of employees really something we need to fix with surveillance or constant monitoring? Or are we just trying to do a better job of project costing as a company? If you try to do both when you don't need to do both, it may certainly harm morale and retention. It's also going to result in bad data because employees will resist and they'll learn to game the system. So at Journyx Timesheet, we have seen the best results, and our technology is built to let people self-report. We think that's a best practice that really yields the most timely and accurate data from people who report their time to you. So in other words, give the end user total control over the time they enter in the system. I gave you the example of letting my timesheet fill itself out for me, which I really love. In that example, it is only my timesheet that's talking to my calendar. And it's entirely between me, my timesheet, and my calendar. No one else sees that technical conversation. Once my timesheet fills itself out for me, and maybe I make a correction or two, when I hit submit, that's it. No one sees my calendar. No one sees the first draft of my timesheet. It's just between me, my timesheet, and my calendar. So I am still self-reporting, even though I'm leveraging powerful technology to automate some things. And sometimes, in fact, that powerful technology can make people worried about surveillance or monitoring. So this is something you want to have a transparent and honest conversation about. The best time collection system will not be well adopted if people don't know you're going to use the data effectively. Because after all, what's the point if the data isn't making a difference in your organization? So it's important to let end users know that the data is valuable and to make your case for time tracking. You do that by being very specific in showing how exactly the timesheet data your people have to stop and enter every day, every week, drives success and results within the organization. You can show that by answering some questions. For example, were the truly successful projects and programs identified? And how did that benefit the company and employees? When you can do that, you can really make the case for what's in it for me to fill out my timesheet. Some specific examples. Was the organization able to decrease time to revenue? If we can bill faster and get paid faster, that will have a very positive impact on our financial performance as a company. When our financial performance is better, that benefits you, our employee. Again, make the case. We're asking for this data. It's very powerful. We're using it effectively. It's good for you. But more generally, we would encourage you to bring users into the process by checking in with individual timesheet users to see how time tracking is going. Now, partly this is just to build buy-in and trust because people feel like you value their feedback. But the person filling out timesheets will actually have actionable suggestions that, when implemented, will increase compliance with the timesheet requirement. Ask them, are your timesheets easy to use? Is it easy to keep from making mistakes? Timesheet configurations drift over time. So it's important to bring users in and continuously improve the process for everyone and not just managers. It's a good time to have the conversation about hours spent versus work accomplished. We all know they're not the same thing, and there's no magic formula for translating one to the other. So wrestling with these problems also gives time tracking a bad name, while companies consider how to estimate projects and maximize billable time without losing the trust of customers or burning out staff. A good practice is to use the valuable time data for benchmarking. Historical time data is great for creating benchmarks, but they should be a discussion starter rather than a quota. More powerful still is let teams benchmark themselves using that time data. It'll give them ownership over the timesheet data you're asking them to submit. They'll understand how it can improve performance at the team level, and that'll translate up to corporate performance. Timesheets are not the most fun thing to do, and people do resist filling them out. There are overt and covert reasons for that, and we hope that we've given you a framework for thinking about how to better encourage timesheet compliance. At the end of the day, all you have is time. We know not everyone likes to track it, but if you empower people to own their time reporting, you'll gain trust. It benefits the people doing the work. It benefits the organization. And we think if you let people use the data, they'll work smarter, which means your company will perform better. It's a bit of a squishy topic. I realize there may be some questions. And if you don't think of questions today and you want to pose some questions to me later, my email address is there for you on the screen.